I'm going to talk about belonging. I have no slides or anything, so it's just yeah, some ideas. And my title is a little formula: be plus longing equals belonging. The Wizard of Oz is a film about Hiraeth. At the beginning, Dorothy longs for a place somewhere over the rainbow, where skies are blue, troubles melt like lemon drops, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Once she's transported to Oz, though, the technicolor land that might be expected to satisfy her longings, she spends every minute longing for her Kansas home and family. Her sole aim is to find a way to return there. What are we to make of this? Is this the case of the grass being always greener, or in this case, the sky is bluer? Or is what happens to Dorothy in leaving and returning to Kansas an illustration of the idea that you may need to leave a place in order to discover how much it matters to you? I want to imagine two different scenarios. In one, once the magic slippers have taken Dorothy home and she's reunited with Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, she becomes restless again and starts to miss the vibrancy and excitement of Oz, starts to dream of returning there. In this case, the grass always being greener on the other side, her longings are not satisfied by returning, and what she wants is to be where she is not. In this restless state, neither Oz nor Kansas will satisfy Dorothy and feel like home. In a second scenario, on returning to Kansas, Dorothy comes to see it with new eyes and loves it all the more for having been away. Her returning is a true homecoming. In the first case, longing for a place evaporates on reaching it, whereas in the second, the longing is satisfied by being there, and the experience of being there is enhanced by the longing one felt for it when away. This second scenario forms the basis of my account of belonging. Belonging in a place, that place being home, is the coming together of two strands, longing, or Hiraeth, and being, hence my title formula. Belonging in a place is being susceptible to longing for it when away, and that longing being converted to satisfaction on returning, on being in it. The longing is grounded in the reality of being in the place, and is not just an unrealistic dream. So the two conditions for belonging, as I'm categorizing it, are number one, longing for the place if removed from it, and number two, the longing being satisfied by being in the place. So that's my little definition. If belonging is defined in this way, then the search for belonging, for home, can be seen as a quest akin to the search for a romantic partner. The two scenarios I sketched above, for Dorothy, have analogues in the world of romantic relationships. Sometimes we fall in love with someone and long for them, only to find that our longings are not satisfied by the reality of being with them. Our longings disappear in the reality of that relationship. In this case, our longings are an unrealistic infatuation, not grounded in the reality of the person we longed for. At other times, when we fall in love with someone and long for them, we find that being with them gives us what we're looking for in a relationship and enables us to thrive. We've succeeded in our quest for love. If I'm right in seeing the quest for belonging as analogous to the quest for love, and if we think that people should be free to choose who to form romantic relationships with, then we have a prima facie reason for thinking that the freedom to search for belonging, to choose where to call home, is also valuable. In contrast with this way of thinking about belonging, then I'm going to look at a more common way of thinking of belonging in terms of roots and or heritage. We belong in the places we come from, according to this kind of way of thinking, the places we're native to or have ancestral connections with. A link between home and heritage is implicit in a range of views on belonging, not just the views of those on the far right. I have American friends who expect to feel a sense of homecoming when they come to Britain or Ireland because their ancestry is British or Irish, for example. I believe this approach to belonging is misguided, though. So there's not much time. I want to do a little whistle stop, looking at various possible ways that we can account for belonging in terms of heritage or ancestry. So according to such an account, belonging in a place would consist in one or more of the following. Number one, having been born in that place. Number two, one's ancestors having been from that place. I mean, there might be other ways of, but those seem the two main things that people refer to in this kind of account. If we apply these conditions rigidly and say that in order to belong in a place, someone must have been born there and have wholly native ancestry, we'll have a very narrow definition of belonging. If, on the other hand, we apply them in a looser way, say that anyone born in a place belongs there, for example, we'll have a relatively wide definition of belonging. So I'm going to argue very, very quickly that there's no straightforward way of applying these conditions that gives us a convincing account of what belonging is. So variant number one, belonging in a place consists in having been born there. This condition is both too narrow and too wide for belonging. Consider the following. A couple are on holiday in a place for a few days, and whilst there, the woman goes into labour and gives birth. The couple and their newborn child get on a train and leave for home within the first week of the child's life, and neither they nor the child have any desire to return. If our place of birth is where we belong, the child would belong in the holiday destination, not their parents' homeland, and this seems counterintuitive. So possibility number two, belonging in a place consists in one's ancestors having lived there. But in which case, how are we to specify any ancestors? How far back in time? If we go back far enough, we'll discover ancestors in many places. What if you discover that your ancestry in a place is, if your ancestry is in a place you've never set foot in and never intend to? Should you pack up and emigrate there? How can belonging be determined in this way? This also seems counterintuitive. So, third possibility, belonging in a place consists in having been born there and one's ancestors having lived there. This is the most demanding way of defining belonging, and something like this seems to be what those who believe people should stay where they belong or go back to where they belong think that belonging is about. If you think second-generation immigrants don't belong in a place, the chances are that this is because even though they were born there, they don't fulfill the ancestry condition for belonging in it. But how far back must one's ancestry in a place go? If we stipulate that it go back many generations, then most of us would fail to meet the criteria for belonging, including many of those shouting the loudest about others not doing so. And how large an area can ancestry entitle us to belong in? If all of my ancestors lived in Folkestone, for example, can I be said to belong in Canterbury? Or should I stay in Folkestone where I belong? And if Canterbury is fine, how about Maidstone or London? What if you're born in one place and your ancestors are from another? Do you belong in neither place? Are you homeless by definition? Even if it were possible to find clarity and come up with a viable account of belonging in terms of heritage, what are we to say about people who for one reason or another just don't fit in their hometowns or homelands? Do we expect them to just knuckle down and accept their fate? This used to be what people did. There was no expectation of a better life than the one you're born into until fairly recent times. Similarly, young men and women were expected to marry locally and once married, remain together until death. But just as we now believe in the freedom to choose who to marry, if at all, we also seem to believe in the freedom to leave home, to study, to work, to marry, to follow a dream, etc. We are compatible with some people and not others. Similarly, some places are right for us and others are not. For some of us, the pull of home is the pull of our birthplace, the place we have the longest history with, the place where we walk in the footsteps of our ancestors. In this case, if this is the place a person longs for and is happy in, then this is where they belong on my account of belonging. What my account offers that accounts based on heritage fail to offer is the understanding that our birthplace may not exert this pull on us, and other places may do so instead. And in these cases, belonging and heritage diverge. What satisfies our longing for belonging may be due to our beginnings in a place, but it may be that we only find true belonging later in life, in a newer place. Let us return to Dorothy. Dorothy, in my second scenario, longs to return to Kansas, and her longings are satisfied when she does so. She's someone who belongs in the place of her birth and ancestry. But let's imagine a slightly different version of her. This Dorothy arrives in Oz, and having killed the Wicked Witch of the East and liberated the Munchkins, makes dear friends and finds that life in Oz is richer and more conducive to her happiness than drab old Kansas. She has adventures, travels to the Emerald City, but makes a home in Munchkinland, where the tornado set down her house. Occasionally, she thinks of her uncle and aunt and wishes she could let them know she's well and happy. But she was never all that close to them anyway, and she finds a real sense of family and belonging among her new neighbours. Surely this version of Dorothy belongs in Oz, not Kansas. Thanks.
Brilliant. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for allowing me to be online. I really appreciate that. I was really hoping to be with you all in person today, but unfortunately my health has meant that I can't be, so I'm sorry about that. I'm an artist. I'm also a senior lecturer in fine art at Falmouth University. I'm really grateful to be here today. I'm basically sharing with you one of my performances, which is entitled Hiraeth an Ode to Belonging, which is obviously one of this conference's themes. And funnily enough, Sharon, is essentially me working through exactly what you've just been talking about in relation to my own life. So this work was first made and performed at Translates Conference, which I co-lead at the University of Northampton in September 22. And then since then, over the last 2 years, I've been developing it, and it's been variously screened at the Women Who Create conference in Cambridge, Performance Studies International in Joburg, at the Last Breath Society at Queen Mary's in London, and at the MA Alumni Show in Northampton. And obviously you're going to get to see it today as well. What you're seeing at the moment on the screen are photographs that have been taken across those various events I just listed during this kind of developmental period of the work. Because I'm a performance artist, essentially you have to kind of do things live to figure out what's working and what isn't. So whenever I'm developing a work, this is essentially my method. I'm currently working on taking this performance back to 3 key sites in Wales, which is which are connected to my family. I have been hoping to show you some footage of that today, but it's not quite ready, so that will get released on my website at some point. Essentially, the performance is a direct exploration of my nomadic life and fragmented cultural heritage. I grew up with family stories of my Welsh lineage, which can be traced back as far as there is written record in Pembrokeshire, and of the family's migration alongside most of the community to Portsmouth following the closure of Pembrokeshire Docks, where my great-grandfather worked at the time. Facing the loss of his livelihood, he had little choice but to agree to move, and the family went with him. There they clung desperately and somewhat hopelessly to the vestiges of our Welsh culture and language, which slowly died, where we were cut off from the land to which we belonged for centuries. I, on the other hand, was born elsewhere, a wanderer, a traveller of no fixed abode, moving across 2 continents and multiple countries. I'm 37 this year, and I think I've toted up 34 addresses in my lifetime, although at this point, I have to be honest, I'm completely losing count. I was born in an English town that we were merely passing through on the way from South Africa to North America, and was then raised across 2 continents, North America and Europe. As a result, my relationship with the concept of home, and indeed belonging, is very fragmented. This work addresses my longing for any sense of home and a feeling of belonging and connection to my ancestors and ancestral lands from which I was cut off. In order to do this, the performance uses stones that have been gathered from every place I've ever lived, either by me or sent to me by loved ones I had to leave behind in those places. Throughout the performance, I select different stones from my collection, depending on which ones feel like they want to perform that day. And then during the performance, I massage each stone with oil, coat it in a fine layer of graphite, charcoal and coal dust, and then use it as a printmaking tool. During that time, I'm meditating on journeying, on place, on land, on home and belonging. In some of the more recent versions of this performance, I've also included singing to the stones, various snippets of traditional folk music, some of which are actually in what would have been my native tongue, Welsh. The work has also been part of a series of works that have dealt with my increasing desire to return to my ancestral heritage as a way to make work about the ecological crisis. In Welsh mythology and literature, such as the Mabinogion, for example, which is a collection of medieval Welsh stories, they reveal this kind of deep and poignant understanding of a relationship between the land and the beings that inhabit that land. In fact, in those stories, we see many characters that are transformed into, fashioned from the land or into animals and birds. The land in those stories has a kind of vitalism and a magic that permeates all experience. Features of the landscape, such as stones, become portals for transformation. They act as liminal spaces between the spiritual and the magical realm and our world. Little or no distinction is made between the human body and the ecology to which it belongs. So indeed, this Welsh word hiraeth, which we're dealing with today, carries layered into it a deep cultural significance of the Welsh framing of our connectivity to land. That's a little bit akin to the idea of blood running through our veins, and then like the roots of a tree connecting and enmeshing in with the land and everything that belongs within it. Therefore, separation from that connectivity results in a deep, deep longing. In times of great ecological crisis, these kinds of ancestral understandings of our relationship to land and the importance of that connectivity to the human spirit become especially poignant and critical. The work has therefore also become a kind of lament for the land and for that deep sense of entanglement. Just before I screen the footage that was taken at the very first performance of this work, I just want to read some questions that were in my mind as I was developing this performance. What stories do stones tell? There's an African proverb that mountains don't meet, people do. But if stones do meet with each other from different places, countries, or even continents, what passes between them? What languages do they speak to one another? How do they converse with each other? Do they experience a longing for home when they are separated from their homelands? What do the stones yearn for? What do they remember? What are their desires? What gifts does displacement from their homeland give them? Does being displaced from a sense of home give the stones access to something they might never otherwise have had? Or more bleakly, in what ways are the stones suffering from this separation? What opportunities have been stolen from them? Can we, that is the stones and me, be in communion with one another in our displacement and our longing and are searching for home? In suffering, are we perhaps kin with one another? Can we be portals for one another to transform both ourselves and each other, to take us to other places or to other realms? And if so, what would any of that mean? Thank you. Could you play the film now, please?
Let's see. Hopefully we can.
It's got a little bit of sound, but it doesn't start for a few minutes, so. So apologies, the sound was a bit patchy online, so I'm hoping you could hear it in the room. That was the very first time that was ever performed, that film, and obviously it's developed quite a bit in the last 2 years. So obviously at some point I will be publishing the new version, which will be available on my website and also on Instagram. Thank you very much for listening. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The sound was great.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. I'm SK Marley. I'm based in South Yorkshire. I'm an independent researcher, writer, and a creative practitioner. Thanks for having me today. This is a really fun day. In my work, I explore themes of queer ecology, queer archaeology, heritage, and land in connection with trans belonging. And I'm going to start today with a bit of a story. So approximately 2,500 years ago, in the flats of East Yorkshire, a once submerged marsh fed by the runoffs from England's spine of the Pennines, some wooden figurines were thrown into a bog. Next slide, please. These are the Ruse-Car figurines, or figures. They are a type of god dolly, a prehistoric wooden anthropomorphic figurine made for spiritual purposes. And there are several other god dollies found across Britain and Ireland, and even more in Central and North Europe. The Ruse-Car figures date from the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, circa 500 BCE, and they have been made purposefully ambiguous in how their biological sex is represented. Archaeologists now think that these figurines have removable phalluses, and their sex was designed to be interchangeable. When compared with other contemporary god dollies, we can see that this ambiguity is intentional. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here are pairs of dimorphic god dollies from North Europe. That's where one figure each represents one biological sex, and they come in a pair. Female god dollies have attached breasts, and males have attached phalluses. And if we can go to the next slide, please. But the Ruse-Car figurines and several others found in Britain and Ireland, such as the Somerset god dolly on the left, which has both breasts and a phallus, have markers of both biological sexes, or interchangeable markers, or none at all. Next slide, please. And this trend links with what's been found in the Neolithic Mediterranean, that's the late Stone Age. The number of anthropomorphic figurines with no discernible sex markers at all found by archaeologists is equal to that of female ones. And there is significance attributed to the in-between when it comes to gender and sex in these objects. And supporting that is the landscapes in which our prehistoric god dollies are primarily found, which are wetlands and bogs. In Iron Age Britain, when the Ruse-Car figures were made, such landscapes represented gateways to the spirit realm. People threw many socially significant objects into bogs as votive offerings to the gods, including these ambiguously sexed bodies. And why bogs? Well, as archaeologist Eve Campbell says, a bog is neither land nor water. It is powerful and dangerous because it is a liminal place transcending categories. In a sense, the same can be said for people who possess non-binary genders. So bogs and bodies, prehistoric Britain, were both in between, fluid, liminal, and arguably because of those qualities, spiritually significant to prehistoric British people. Next slide, please. So in North Yorkshire, there's a place called Starcar, Mesolithic settlement, dating to about 12,000 BCE, so really old. Here, tens of headdresses made from stag and deer skulls have been found. When worn, their headdresses allow the wearer to merge with bioorganic material of a non-human animal, temporarily becoming a hybrid human, non-human being. And archaeologists believe that the wearers of these headdresses would have either been hunters disguising themselves from their prey, or more likely, spiritual leaders in their communities. Similar horned hybrid figures appear globally in cave art, far back in the Paleolithic, oldest age of Homo sapiens, and are thought to represent supernatural beings, gods. Even today, some shamans practicing in various cultures around the world wear horned headdresses, and in some cultures are also gender fluid, moving between different genders temporarily for rituals, or living and dressing as female, regardless of their biological sex. So this is the story I'm telling, that British prehistoric spirituality played with and sometimes abandoned entirely our current day binary values, both in regards to gender and sex, but also nature and culture. And we can call that queer. As a trans non-binary person myself, it's been really healing for me to learn about these objects. They show that people living outside of our present day binary categories have been around for a very long time. And I think this story of a queer prehistoric Britain can foster feelings of belonging for young trans people in Britain today, which is the objective of my social impact project, Our Transcapes, a pilgrimage through queer prehistory, which I'm going to talk about that now. But before I do, I'm just going to run through some terminology real quick. So I'm going to have the next slide, please. Thanks. So I'm going to say these words a lot. Cisgender and transgender. Cisgendered folks are those people who do identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. So if their birth certificate says female, they are female. Transgender people are people who do not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. Can I have the next slide, please? And these are also two words I'm going to mention. Heteronormativity. Yeah. Heteronormativity is a form of dualistic thinking. It refers to our socio-cultural received ideas of gender, sex, and sexuality in Western Europe today, where things work in a sort of binary relationship with nothing in between, like male, female, girl, boy, gay, straight. Queer, on the other hand, is a non-thinking. It allows for grey zones, spectrums, and omissions. Some people in the LGBTQ plus community identify with free themselves from static or to reappropriate the homophobic slur. The verb, though, to queer something, is to disrupt what we assume to be true about something. Can I have the next slide, please? Cool. So these are two fields that I work with in my work: queer ecology, queer anthropology. Seek to disrupt the assumptions we might make in the fields of ecology and archaeology. So how we interpret contexts of the natural world and cultures and people of the past. Can I have the next slide, please? Cool. So on to my project. So why is there a need for queer history, and what is my project going to do about it? Our Transcapes seeks to defy current day anti-trans narratives that are shared quite a lot these days in our mainstream media. And it wants to do that because we want to foster trans healing and belonging, both internally and externally. These anti-trans narratives commonly purport that trans people are new, unnatural, and a bit of a worrying trend. And if we can have the next slide, please, we can see how the media is trying very hard in the last decade to convince us of that narrative. So I'll just talk a little bit about the table on the left. This is research taken by Mermaids Charity. And I'll just give one example, but this is basically looking at how media has changed in how it talks about transgender people from 2012 to 2017-18. And they have looked at all of the ways transgender is associated with different lexicons. In the bottom row, we can see how many times transgender people have aligned with crime words. So rapist, paedophile, prison, criminal. In 2012, mainstream media did that stuff 4 times, and in 2017 did it 195 times. That's quite an increase. And on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the numbers of anti-trans hate crimes recorded by the Home Office from 2011 to 2021. And over that same 10-year kind of period, a 10-fold increase of anti-trans hate crime. So that's the media landscape. And if we go to the next slide, please, you can see the impact of that. So young trans people are internalizing these anti-trans narratives. I'll just read a couple, but one is, not being trans, myself with shame a lot, like I won't live a normal life or not feel out of place in this cisgender heteronormative world. And someone else says, when I'm indistinguishable from a cisgender man, my life can be real. I might be 50, better than. So there's this kind of longing to belong. So yeah, young trans folks disproportionately encounter mental health difficulties in comparison to their cisgender peers. And while being outdoors and in community is beneficial for mental health, trans people don't feel exploring outdoor spaces. So how is this project going to tackle? If I can have the next slide, please. So this project, Our Transcape, is a twofold project. Really. It's a pilgrimage and a creative writing exploration of genderism. In the first instance, I'll take young trans folks out to an enormous bog in Yorkshire, and we'll have an on-site creative writing task. We will have a research survey before and after so that we can also monitor impact. And after that, we'll try and widen the project beyond Yorkshire. Can I have the next slide, please? So yeah, the first iteration of the project is Yorkshire-based, and we wanted to embody the values of queer ecology, so interconnection and community. So we co-designed the project with 2 local queer organisations, and Stay at Sheffield will people I work with to get the participants. Can I have the next slide? Yeah, cool. So I'm just going to briefly touch on pilgrimage and writing and why we're using those 2 things. So typically, pilgrimage is around heteronormative stories of national, spiritual ancestry. Academic Peter Crawford says that stories are basic, social, and contract. They tell us how to behave, what to believe. They require being told and revived in order to maintain their meaning. And the main story is obviously through which that retelling happens. National stories of who we should be tend to include trans people and other minority groups, making it difficult for trans people to believe that they belong. By taking a pilgrimage to a place where queer prehistory is lived, put ourselves back into that story of national spiritual ancestry, treading it into the earth as a community and treading ourselves back into the landscape preserved trans history for thousands of years. The creative writing exercise will ask participants to imagine themselves as a queer god body, perceive themselves as a revered figure from local landscapes, natural materials, and imbued with people's to write from that perspective. Writing from the perspective of a character instead of ourselves can mimic the psychotherapy practice of witnessing. It allows us to step outside of our issues, the space between our own lived experience and that of others. And in that space, there is opportunity for perception shift outside of the trauma and hypervigilance that a lot of trans people live with. So in this writing task, yeah, we hope that it's with trans narratives and more of a hopeful one. Okay, final slide, please. Point. As I said, in the future, to expand to Yorkshire, taking it online as well as other locations that queer prehistoric objects have been found. By going online, we can reach people who might not identifying publicly as trans or who can't join publicly. After that, I would like to invite cisgender people to attend. Liberation from dualistic thinking can free us in different measures, right? Not just gender and sex. So hopefully this would inspire people to allow within themselves anything that doesn't adhere to our current day narrow ideas of who we should be. And lastly, our binary lens to nature, thinking of ourselves, the natural world, has damaged the world. It's something we're slowly unlearning. And I think we can learn from queer prehistory, like the headdresses of Star Car, to challenge the attitudes that have to unsustainably exploit nature. The only issue I think with this project is that we're arguing non-normative history, and that can risk reinforcing the binary between cisgender and transgender people. This is contradictory to our project's non-dualist goal, and it can nourish us and them with nature that empowers our difference. But at its core, everything is telling young trans people, natural, you're not new, you're part of you. Reducing the power of our nation's limited idea of itself and ourselves, and allowing all of us to belong. Thank you.
Urban neurodifferent people yearn for more neuroinclusive cities, yet the lives, needs, and disabilities of neurodifferent people have invariably been disregarded in urban policy. This is a missed opportunity, since understanding inflections of neurodiversity upon the ways urban environments are conceived, materialized, used, and experienced can help provide more comfortable urban atmospheres for everyone. Local authority and community-led projects providing more mind-friendly spaces have been exploring the potential of neuro-inclusive urbans, including with street calming projects, oasis gardens, wayfinding provision, and sensory spaces. And this talk shares insights from a drift I took through London across so-called neuro-inclusive design spaces. These are all neuro-inclusive spaces that have been so-called by architects, urban professionals, project authors. Next slide, please. This talk will have 5 parts. First, I will show the root of the drift. Then I will discuss the method. I'll explain a bit about the neurodiversity movement, and there will be discussion of the neuro-inclusive design places I visited. And then finally, I will consider all the places I visited and sort of argue for a recoding of the city to be more neuro-inclusive. Next slide, please. Recently in Bologna, I encountered this sculpture by Gianni Colombo, and by producing structures that unsettle us, lots of different methods, he aimed to show the physical and psychic conditioning of our environment, and that people have perceptual differences. And my drift similarly seeks to raise awareness of perceptual differences and to reflect how we can consider neurodiversity in the urban space. Next slide, please. So here is the route I took from Walthamstow in North London, where they have urban calming and wayfinding down through central London, and then finishing at Battersea Park, where they have a sort of neurodiversity support hub with sort of social horticulture. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is my method. So walking research began in post-war Paris with the Situationists, exploring the city in unexpected ways. And then during the 1990s, George Marcus developed a multi-sited ethnography as a form of circumstantial activism. He advocated for research which follows the people, the thing, the metaphor, the plot, biography, or conflict. And ethnographic mobile methods have utility in the field of neuro-urban inquiry because they can effectively reveal mobility, immobility, relations that otherwise would remain hidden. My solo drift is preparation for one strand of my PhD research, which will be exploring London with different people and gaining their experience and how they think, how they experience in the city and how they might want to see the city become more inclusive for them. Yeah, and schizocartography is a method developed by Tina Richardson, and she explains it challenges dominant powers and offers a process for remodeling their structure, not only to suit heterogeneous voices, but also to reflect a history that may be counter to the dominant one. And also quite prominent for neuro-urban research is critical disability studies and neurodiversity paradigm analysis. Next slide, please. So what is neurodifference and neuroinclusivity? The neurodiversity movement was ignited by the work of autistic self-advocate Judith Singer in the late 90s. And neurodifferent people make up approximately 1 in 5 of the global population. Well-known neurocognitive types include autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. And neurodifferent conditions are viewed as an inherent part of a person's identity and experience. Next slide, please. This slide shows the 2 main types of neurodiversity, which are unacquired neurodifference, so the conditions that you were born with, which are natural variations, and acquired neurodifference, so neurologic conditions like Parkinson's disease, also mental health conditions, and the bidirectional arrows show the complexity and the blurred lines of the different subsets. Next slide, please. And this is the sort of the key theory behind the neurodiversity movement. So you've got Milton, who was a researcher at the University of Kent, who came up with the idea of double empathy, that there's not a problem inherent with neurodivergent people, and that it's a cultural misunderstanding. We need to understand each other a bit better, and there needs to be work from both sides, not just neurodifferent people being pathologized or being told they're unwell and sick. And then the neurodiversity paradigm is, arguing for a position where neurodiversity is seen as a natural and valuable form of human diversity, such as other minoritized groups. And Tugel describes how voices of the neurodiversity movement are proliferating, advocating, debating, insisting, decrying, lobbying, influencing policy, and now designing research. Next slide, please. So now the drift begins. Urban planning codes have historically not considered neurodiversity. It's been called the under-recognized realm of urban design. And so, with limited time, I'll move on to the slides. Slide, please. One proposed solution for increasing neuro-inclusivity in our neighborhoods is creation of calmer neighborhoods that could not only be more mind-friendly for neurodifferent people, but more mind-friendly for everyone. Neighborhood calming in Waltham Forest began as part of the Mini Holland framework, but is now being progressed according to the 20-minute neighborhood principles. And Walthamstow has a lot of different legends. If you walk around there, they've got closed roads, and they've got bollards, and they're created sort of new spaces. So it's to improve safety and encourage sustainable travel. And new neuro-inclusive signage was designed and installed to aid wayfinding in the borough, to make the borough more legible and accessible. And overall, independent research has shown that there's more active travel, reduced car ownership, lower road injury risk, and reduced street crime. Next slide, please. Building on the success of the wayfinding scheme to improve legibility for the streetscape, there's now been a wayfinding scheme for the wetlands. REBA have commended the scheme for being well thought out, using a variety of materials and methods to underline the industrial heritage of the past. So let's try to evoke all of the past industries of the area, and there's wetlands in bricks too. The different schemes in Walthamstow are collectively part of the wider Legible London scheme. You've probably seen those map lists all about London. Yep, next slide, please. Thank you. Yep. The Chad Gordon Autism Campus was opened in Harringay in 2021. Chad Gordon, a local adult with autism, was tragically murdered in May 2020 in a case of mistaken identity. And this hub was created for local people and to his memory. And it provides all sorts of service, from mindfulness to drop-in centres to music, gardening, and lots of activities in the sort of garden space. And the architects had a very modest budget, and they retrofitted and reused 2 buildings which were sort of derelict and out of use. Next slide, please. The Grimaldi building is a landmark in inclusive and neuro-inclusive design. It's described as an exemplar in designing for blind and for neurodiverse people. It's the first building in the UK to use the new neurodiversity buildings standard that's currently being rolled out and trialled, and eventually might be sort of more mandated for buildings. The accessibility consultant, Jean Hewitt, said providing a design for different accessibility needs and resolving conflicts in their needs was surprisingly easy. And she says, this creation of this building to be very inclusive on a sort of charities budget shows that anybody would be able to do it. Next slide, please. The new Alfred Place Oasis Garden has been identified as mind-friendly because it provides calm space for people to relax and have recreation. It was a street, you know, that was sort of just tarmac and not that use. And now it's been turned into a garden with a playground, and it's part of the wider place making scheme called the West End project. There's a new project park on Hungary Street, and an oasis space outside the hospital, the greening, refurbishment of Whitfield Gardens, and this one might be the Shaftesbury Theatre at Princess Circus as a new public space where there used to be some sort of terminal for electric or something. They've removed that and put a green space instead. And New London architecture said that the scheme paves the way for all cities to function differently, a softer, calmer, more resilient and more sociable spaces. Next slide, please. This is us at King's College London. So I don't know if you've been down there, but they're pedestrianised and it's much calmer, much more chilled, much more relaxed. It's not quite as green as that photo shows. That's something we need to work on. And there's an eco art project which is looking at rewilding the city, you know, imagining a mythical time of ecological abundance where we can live in harmony with the natural world. And King's College London have been leading research on, you know, benefits, and there's reduced pollution and you know, improvements in well-being, and also in the surrounding streets, traffic's not increased dramatically, or pollution. Next slide, please. These are some transport spaces. So there was a sort of a new space behind Liverpool Street station, and they've now made it a green kind of social environment. Be calm or be together. And this is the new HS2 station at Old Oak Common, which is just getting started. So I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years. And they've, to make travelling calmer, and a big sort of network, sort of hub, they're going to have this parkland and wetlands. So it'll be a green, peaceful arrival. Next slide, please. Boddington Square Piazza provides an exemplar for a bottom-up community-led project for a mind-friendly neighbourhood. It is a neuro-inclusive space because by slowing traffic and providing a social hub for the local community, linking the cafe to the gardens opposite, it provides an oasis of calm in a busy area. The project was part of a wider movement of squatters in the area, moving into unoccupied spaces during the late 20th century to progress socially inclusive politics. I also wanted to go to the farm, which is in Vauxhall, which is on squatted land in quite that time. Still today, it is run on a cooperative social housing model. And so I think if you are a child of a resident, you kind of have priority, but if there's void, then there's sort of a charity that goes to sort of people in housing need, people with disabilities, refugees, people, homeless. Next slide, please. Yeah. Pride London is a long-established and highly successful project based in Battersea Park that uses social horticulture and gardening for all different people, really. A lot of people with autism, mental health conditions, or physical disabilities, but also people that might be feeling vulnerable in life and need some sort of socialising and confidence building. And the most recent garden is one for dementia and memory loss. It's quite good for showing how people with designing for one neurodifference helps people with another, and also everybody. As an example here, within the hub itself, they've got tool stores which are shallow and have an allocated space which aids memory enforcement. Next slide, please. Next week, I'll be heading to the new development of Brent Cross Newtown, where I'll be doing my next mobile research, because they've got a walking tour where they'll show you all around and tell you what's being planned. The designers say that the town will be mind-friendly and support well-being as a calm and green oasis park town with all of the necessary amenities close by, and it's the revival of the garden suburb movement. Couple of stops north if you go to Hampstead, but house prices there are quite expensive, so I think it'd be that neuro-inclusive necessarily for me, but so that they're thinking about these things. Next slide, please. With limited time, I will just show this slide quickly. It shows how exploring these different neuro-inclusive spaces in this script has enabled identification of 8 key themes for recoding a neuro-inclusive public realm. These include calmer cities, compact cities, neurodiversity support hubs like Thrive, neuro-inclusive transport places, sensory urban design codes like the Grimaldi building, wayfinding and legibility, oasis and refuge space, and new garden town neighbourhoods with inclusive social housing programs. Next slide, please. Now for some closing remarks. Mobile research projects in cities across the globe can reveal hidden geographies of neuro-urban mobility-immobility relations and contribute to a discourse that can be continually expanded and deepened by different perspectives. Increased research exploring the ways we can create neuro-inclusive atmospheres throughout cities is vital. Enjoyment of urban public space is, however, weather contingent, and access depends on urban housing availability. I've not spoken about this, but gender mainstreaming, transforming the urban realm in Vienna, where they had lots of projects working with women to find out where they felt unsafe or didn't feel they had access or their needs weren't being accommodated. Was a success. It led to over 60 projects being completed. And that can provide a model for how neuro-inclusivity can be mainstreamed in the public realm through legislation, policy, and resource allocation. And very finally, strategies to meet the needs of neuro-different people intersect with the needs of a range of other people. So tackling the problem from a neuro-different perspective will create much friendlier, softer, and respectful cities, and comfortable for everyone.
Yeah. I wanted to, I don't know if it's a comment or a question. I found your presentation uplifting because it sounds like this is something that is not financially problematic, benefits everyone. It just sounds like, wow, we can do all these wonderful things. And I guess what I'm afraid of is that somehow the situation is not quite as wonderful as that. And I guess the question is, what are the obstacles that are needing to be addressed? But it made me feel really good that you know, there's this research being done, and hopefully people can get on board and it benefit everyone.
It's an excellent point. I mean, the reason why it's required research in this area is because there's a whole history of this not being considered, and therefore, as you say, I mean, there's positive things happening where people are just beginning to think about it, but most of these examples are retrospective, things that have people calling mind-friendly or more neuro. Are they actually? And so that's where research can explore, and psychogeography's mobile methods, mobile ethnography is quite a good way to actually get out of different people, ask them about how they're experiencing the city and what barriers there are, what things they enjoy, and how going forward we need to consider these things into policy. But I suppose you want to be quite positive. And there are a lot of advantages that a lot of these things don't necessarily need to be expensive. And of course, a lot of it isn't to do with just the space, but how we behave in it. But rather than everything being based on psychology, we're going to diagnose you, label you, but talking about people's environment and allows conversations about workplaces, housing, and so it also begins to come into cultures and spaces, and not just how we make the space more inclusive in design, but how are we behaving towards each other and double empathy and becoming. So you're right, very different people, many are suffering greatly, and that shouldn't be diminished. But hopefully we're coming to a point after 40 years of the neurodiversity scholarship getting going, we're beginning to ask people about what change would you like now?
That's great, thank you. When I was listening, watching, I was thinking about in Berlin, where it was this movement called Kiezblock, where it's very much about traffic calming based stuff. And it's just simple bollards, and it seems, from my experience perspective, it's quite amazing the difference just a few bollards can make to how an area changes. But it made me think about all your examples are in London. Do you come across many outside of London in the UK or outside of the UK, or is it very
I think because we're based at King's College.
Yeah, I guess that's why.
Yeah, there are things happening in other big cities around the world, and lots of projects in Italy that have actually done sort of urban acupuncture, where they've looked at their area specifically. I think because they had urban acupuncture. But for making small changes that make healing was their idea. And so they actually did a project because they had these autism centres in their village and small town. And so they did a research project of how can we make small changes in the town so that we're taking more account. And I think the acupuncture they were reversible projects. So people could experience them, see how they liked them, whether it worked. And I think many of them have been kept. I think the main point was just that the majority of people have been living in the city centre for maybe 40 or 50 years, but nobody really asked them how they were experiencing it or whether to make it feel like it was more their city. But I'm interested to read more about what's happening in Berlin.
It's good to know that it's happening.
And they can be very controversial. I'm not necessarily advocating these things. I'm just describing what's going on. I mean, road calming can be like your car, or you've got a need for it. It can be. Research is showing that it seems to be very workable. And the LTNs, I think they call them, but there's a big debate about it. I think probably we will move towards reduced car ownership as time goes by, and it's just a transition.
I mean, I thought your presentation was it had lots of detail in it, and it's really interesting, and lots of good resources for people to use, and good to have influence by other psychogeographers as well. So
I think psychogeography will have a big role, because experiencing this quite urban planning and architecture, but the way that people experience, and why I like geography is the ways that people experience it, small things that you wouldn't notice, or we all have a different city in our mind, and not just from an urban